Let's talk about fear. A lot of people like to go to scary movies or ride on thrilling roller coaster rides to experience a little bit of terror because of the adrenaline rush that goes with it. But when you're facing real fears in real life, that's not a lot of fun. So let's see what we can understand about fear. Number one, fear is a common experience. Fear takes many shapes: dread, anxiety, worry, terror, and more. Fear is a natural emotional response to danger or to the threat of pain. And so we become afraid in anticipation of some painful future event that may occur. So we all experience fear. And yet, fear is also unique. We each have our own individual set of things that we're afraid of based on our past experiences. And so your fears might be quite different from mine. Now, fear can be a very reasonable reaction to some very real threat. But fear can also sometimes be an overreaction to something that's not true at all. So let's take a few minutes and talk about fear. First of all, understand that fear can be evil or it can be good. The Bible never describes God as expressing fear because nothing could ever possibly be a threat to God. But Jesus probably did experience fear, especially as he was anticipating his death on the cross. Take a look at Matthew chapter 26. Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, "Sit here while I go over there to pray." He took Peter and Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. From Jesus' example, we learn that fear doesn't have to be sinful because Jesus never sinned. In fact, fear can be good if it leads us to take action to protect ourselves from real dangers. Fear can ensure that we take appropriate action, appropriate caution when necessary. But fear can also serve evil. Fear can keep us from trusting God. Jesus once challenged his disciples in Matthew chapter 8, "Why are you afraid? You have such little faith." And fear can also keep us from obeying God. If we fear the opinions and the reactions of people more than we fear God, then we're going to act to please people more than we act to honor God. That's why fear can be evil, either evil or good. Now, I want you to think of something that you may not have ever thought of before. I want you to consider that you can really listen to your fears. First of all, own up to your fear. Don't deny it or pretend you don't have it. Fear in and of itself is not a sin. The Bible writers are very open about expressing fear. Take a look at Psalm 55. "My heart pounds in my chest. The terror of death assaults me. Fear and trembling overwhelm me, and I can't stop shaking." So you see that people in the Bible really owned their fears. Now the second thing is to evaluate your fear. Where is this coming from? Does this represent reality? Is it based in some real situation? Or is it just something from the past, some remnant from the past? And if it is just a remnant of the past, then let it go. So you want to evaluate your fear to discern whether or not it represents some kind of real issue that you really should be concerned about, some real danger, some real threat, or whether it's just something that really doesn't reflect truth in your life. And when we talk about listening to your fear, the third thing is to learn from it. Learn from your fear. God can use your emotions to help you understand yourself better. Jesus asked his followers, "Why are you afraid?" And that's a great question that we can ask ourselves along with him. What experiences in your past then have provoked this response of fear in you today? Are there things that are there lies that you're believing that support the perspective of fear in your life? What is it that has triggered this response? And so take some time to pray about what God might want to bring to the surface in your heart to help you grow and mature in your life, in your faith. Now, there's one last application when we think about the fears that we all face, and that is to act in faith, not fear. Now listen, the emotion of fear, the emotion in itself, is not opposed to faith. Because faith is about taking action. It's not about how you feel about different things. Jesus experienced the emotion of fear, but he still went forward and acted in faith to obey God by going to the cross. However, the mindset of fear is the opposite of faith. Because beyond that initial emotion that we all feel from time to time, Fear can become a settled way of looking at reality. And fear becomes this grid through which we look at everything in life rather than looking at life through the grid of God's goodness and God's care. And when you start to adopt the mindset of fear, then it becomes difficult to obey God. It becomes difficult to trust God with situations in life. And so I want you to think through carefully what action is appropriate in response to your fear. And as you do that, that's going to help the fear to feel less overwhelming and help you come up with a sense of strategy for coping with it. So on one hand, you might decide you need to hold back and set wise boundaries because the danger or the threat that represented by your fear is realistic. And that's the right decision to make in many cases. But on the other hand, sometimes you need to move forward and act on the basis of truth rather than on your emotions in spite of the fear, because the fear is not really realistic. It's more in your imagination. And so sometimes that's the right thing to do. That's what we mean when we talk about acting in faith rather than in fear.